The hearing room was more than just a chamber. It was a stage where reputations were built and destroyed. Overhead panels of harsh white lights poured down like an unrelenting spotlight, washing every face in unforgiving clarity. There was nowhere to hide, not a bead of sweat, not the faintest tremor in a hand could escape the glare. Cameras were everywhere. Their mechanical whirs and quiet clicks became the heartbeat of the room. Long black camera rails glided silently along the edges, their lenses prowling from one witness to another, hunting for the single frame that could make tomorrow's front page. Every shift of a shoulder, every twitch of an eyebrow was potential ammunition for the evening news. Along the back wall sat a row of veterans. They wore no uniforms now, only plain jackets and shirts, but their bearing was unmistakable. Straight back, squared shoulders, and eyes locked forward like sentinels. Some had ribbons and medals pinned neatly over their hearts, small flashes of color against muted fabric. Others bore no visible decorations, yet the way they sat told you they carried heavier honors, the kind forged in silence and memory. The air itself felt heavier here, almost charged. You could hear the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the faint rustle of papers from the committee desks. Somewhere a pen clicked twice too loud in the otherwise controlled quiet. The smell of polished wood and faintly stale coffee lingered in the air, a scent every staffer in this building knew well. It wasn't just a hearing. It was an arena. Every person in that room, staffer, journalist, lawmaker, veteran, knew that the next few minutes could change the narrative for years to come. And so the room waited, holding its breath. And then she appeared. Jasmine Crockett stepped through the side door with the precision of someone who knew exactly where every camera was and exactly how much weight each step carried. Her navy blue suit was cut sharp, the kind that speaks before you do. Every seam, every fold sat perfectly in place, as if it had been measured for this very moment. But it wasn't the suit that made people lean forward. It was her eyes, steady, locked, and unblinking. They didn't search for friends in the room, nor flinch at the sight of enemies. They simply assessed as though she were walking into a courtroom, a battlefield, and a chess match all at once. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, 1, 2, 3 each, sound echoing in the cavernous chamber like a countdown nobody could stop. Even the hum of cameras seemed to fade under that rhythm. Some in the gallery shifted in their seats, sensing they were about to witness something worth remembering. She didn't rush, she didn't stall. She moved at the exact pace of a person who controls the tempo, forcing everyone else to adjust. And in that deliberate walk from the door to her seat, Jasmine Crockett sent an unspoken message. I didn't come here to survive this hearing. I came here to own it. Across the table, Donald Trump sat back in his chair, as if the hearing were just another episode of a show he'd been hosting for years. His navy suit was immaculate, the red tie perfectly centered, but the real statement was the expression on his face, a slow, knowing half smile that had weathered countless rallies, depositions, and scandals. That smirk wasn't just for the cameras, it was for her. Minutes earlier, he had leaned into his microphone and with a casual shrug mocked her position on veterans' rights. His voice carried that practiced blend of confidence and dismissal, the kind that's designed to draw applause from allies and roll eyes from opponents. Now, as Jasmine Crockett approached, he didn't flinch or adjust. He simply watched her, the corners of his mouth still curled, as if daring her to try and wipe it away. His elbows rested lightly on the armrest, but his hands were folded loosely in front of him, a posture meant to read as relaxed, but the slight tension in his knuckles betrayed otherwise. Behind him, aides leaned in just enough to whisper quick lines, not to advise him, but to make sure every tilt of his head and every flick of his wrist played well on camera. For Trump, this wasn't just politics, it was performance, and he thought he had the script memorized. As Jasmine took her seat, she placed a single manila envelope on the polished wood of the committee table. It wasn't large, it wasn't flashy, just a thin rectangle of worn beige paper, ordinary to anyone who didn't know better. But in the charged stillness of the room, it looked like the most dangerous object in sight. She didn't touch it again, didn't adjust it. She simply set it down within reach, angled so that the cameras in front of her could catch its edges. The faint crease along one corner hinted it had been carried for some time, perhaps waiting for the right moment to be open. A few heads in the gallery tilted ever so slightly, eyes narrowing in curiosity. On the press bench, a reporter paused mid-scribble, glancing at the envelope as though it might contain the next headline. Across the table, Donald Trump's eyes flicked toward it for a fraction of a second before returning to her face, too quick for most to notice, but not quick enough to hide that he had noticed. The manila envelope sat there silent and unassuming, but it carried the weight of a loaded question. What's inside a contract? A letter, a photograph, or something that could break the rhythm of this hearing and rewrite the day entirely? Nobody knew, and that was exactly how Jasmine wanted it. Trump leaned forward, his hands resting lightly on the table, as if he were about to share a business tip rather than address a congressional hearing on veterans' rights. His voice carried that familiar, measured arrogance, loud enough to command attention, slow enough to make sure every camera caught each word. "We call that smart reallocation," he said, letting the phrase roll off his tongue like it was a punchline only he understood. "You take from where it's not needed and you put it where it can actually make a difference. It's called running things the right way." He gave a soft, dismissive chuckle, the kind that isn't meant to invite laughter, but to signal superiority. The smirk returned slightly wider now, as if he just delivered a line that would play perfectly on his supporters' favorite news channels. In the veterans section, no one laughed. A man with a silver star on his jacket stared at him with the stillness of someone who had heard far too many excuses and seen far too little action. Another veteran shifted in his seat, jaw tightening, eyes fixed on the man speaking so casually about cutting their lifeline. Trump didn't look their way. He was still focused on Jasmine Crockett, waiting for her reaction, confident he'd just undercut her argument before she even began. The words hadn't even fully settled into the air before the change began. In the veterans section, faces shifted almost in unison, not in loud protests, but in the quiet, unmistakable language of men and women who had seen too much to take such words lightly. A man in the second row, broad-shouldered with a neatly pressed jacket, narrowed his eyes until they were just two sharp lines. His fingers tapped once against his knee, not in impatience, but in the steady rhythm of someone holding back the urge to speak. Beside him, an older veteran with deep lines etched into his face simply exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate, as if releasing more than just air. The air in the room thickened. Conversations in the press row faltered. A camera operator adjusted his lens instinctively, zooming in on the veterans' faces. No one in that section smiled. No one nodded, only a wall of stillness and steel, each of them absorbing the remark in their own way. It wasn't outrage that filled the air, it was something heavier. The kind of silence that says we've heard promises before and we know how they break. And as that silence spread, the entire chamber seemed to lean toward what would happen next. Jasmine didn't rush. She let the silence work for her. One slow, deliberate motion at a time, she reached for the thin manila envelope sitting on the desk in front of her. Her fingers slid under the flap, the sound of the paper tearing just loud enough to cut through the stale air of the committee room. She pulled out a single stapled document, the top page marked with an official seal. Without looking at Trump, she began to read, her voice steady, sharp, and carrying across every corner of the chamber. 1968, she said, pausing only long enough for the year to hang in the air. Donald J. Trump medical deferment granted, reason bone spurs. Trump's smirk tightened just slightly. Jasmine turned the page. 1969. Donald J. Trump medical deferment renewed, same reason, bone spurs. A few heads in the veterans section tilted forward, listening now with a different kind of focus. Jasmine didn't flinch. 1970 deferment renewed again. 1971 renewed again. 4 separate years. 4 separate opportunities to serve, all avoided for the same reason. Her eyes finally lifted from the page and locked onto Trump's. "And now you sit here calling cuts to veterans benefits a smart reallocation." The words didn't need to be shouted. The weight was in the record, in the ink on the page, and in the sharp intake of breath that rippled through the room. Cameras clicked faster. Somewhere in the back, a reporter whispered, "This is going viral." Trump forced a smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was the smile of a man who wanted the cameras to believe he was still in control, even as the ground shifted under his feet. He leaned back in his chair, or at least tried to, but his right hand gripped the armrest so tightly that his knuckles blanched. The faint creak of the leather under his palm gave him away. His gaze darted, not long, not obvious, but just enough for those watching closely to notice. First toward his counsel, then to the row of aides behind him, as if searching for an unspoken cue or a lifeline that wasn't there. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. Reporters had stopped typing. Veterans in the gallery stared with folded arms, unmoving, like stone statues passing judgment. And for the first time that morning, Donald Trump wasn't smiling to himself, he was holding his breath. From the second row of the Veterans Gallery, a sound broke through the heavy silence, a slow, deliberate click. Sergeant Daniel Reeves, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, with the hard-set jaw of someone who had seen too much reach down to his right leg. The audience's eyes followed his every move. With practiced hands, he twisted the lock of his prosthetic limb. A faint hiss of released air echoed in the chamber. Then, with one firm motion, he lifted the artificial leg from his knee and set it on the bench beside him. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft thud of metal against wood. Reeves sat taller now, his empty pant leg hanging loose, a silent testimony to the price he had paid in Iraq. He didn't need to say a word. His actions spoke for him. This is what service costs. This is what you're talking about when you cut veterans' benefits. Reeves didn't flinch. With deliberate strength, he reached forward, lifted the prosthetic leg off the bench, and placed it on the committee table in front of him. Thunk! The sound was heavy, final, like a gavel ending an argument that no one dared continue. It echoed off the marble walls, rolled across the chamber, and seemed to hang in the air long after the leg had settled. Every conversation, every shuffle of paper stopped dead. Even the camera crews froze their lenses, locked on the solitary object resting on the polished wood. It wasn't just a piece of metal and carbon fiber. In that moment, it became a statement, a challenge, and an accusation all at once. The room held its breath. The sight of the prosthetic leg on the table was more than symbolic. It was a direct punch to Donald Trump's words. Moments earlier, he had called cutting veterans' benefits a smart reallocation. Now that statement hung in the air like a bad smell exposed for what it was. Reeves' silent act had stripped away the political polish and left only the raw truth behind every budget cut. There was a body, a sacrifice, a life forever changed. Trump's smirk faltered. He shifted in his seat, the challenge in Reeves' gesture impossible to ignore. This wasn't a debate point anymore. It was personal. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked on Trump like a marksman sighting a target. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. The silence in the room carried her words farther than any microphone could. That she said gesturing to Reeves' prosthetic leg is service. That is sacrifice. Her gaze sharpened each syllable, landing like a hammer. And you, Mr. Trump, what about you? The question didn't just hang in the air, it cut through it, slicing straight to the core. Every head in the chamber turned toward Trump, waiting for an answer he didn't seem ready to give. Without warning, the massive screen behind the committee table flickered to life. A date stamp appeared in the corner the day Congress passed the Veteran Support Act. But the photo filling the screen wasn't of a signing ceremony or a meeting with veterans. It was Donald Trump on a golf course. Clad in a white polo and red cap, club in hand, mid-swing, a grin stretching across his face. The contrast was brutal. While legislation meant to protect veterans was finalized, he was teeing off under a sunny sky. A ripple of murmurs swept through the audience. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch in Trump's jaw as the image burned itself into the room's memory. The image on the screen faded, replaced by a stark bar graph. No colors, no flashy design, just cold black numbers climbing year after year. Across the top, Homeless Veterans United States. The bars told the story without needing words. Each year, under Trump's administration, the number spiked higher. The most recent bar towered above the rest, the figure bold and unflinching, plus 27% in 3 years. A low murmur rippled through the spectators, then silence. You could hear the shifting of suits, the faint creak of leather chairs. Even those who came to defend Trump avoided eye contact with the screen. For the veterans in the back row, the graph wasn't statistics. It was names, faces, and brothers sleeping on concrete. From the side of the hearing room, a woman stood, mid-50s, dressed in a plain black dress, her hands trembling as she clutched a folded American flag to her chest. "My name is Linda Hayes," she began, voice shaking but clear. "My husband, Sergeant Michael Hayes, served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He came home with injuries that never healed." She paused, swallowing hard. "When he died last year, the VA told me the burial benefit had been reduced. I didn't have enough to cover his funeral. So I sold his truck to bury him." Her voice cracked on the last words. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Some veterans bowed their heads, others clenched their fists. Linda looked straight at Trump. "You call it smart reallocation. I call it leaving us to die twice." Each word from Linda's testimony cut deeper than the last, like a blade carving into the glossy image Trump had built for years. The champion of the troops, the man who wrapped himself in flags at rallies, now sat frozen under the harsh glare of the hearing room lights. The cameras caught everything: the tightness in his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes, the faint tremor in his left hand as it gripped the armrest. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. On social media, live captions flashed: "Widow forced to sell truck to bury veteran husband after VA cuts." For the veterans in the room, this wasn't politics, it was betrayal. For Trump, it was the unraveling of a brand he thought untouchable. Jasmine reached for the thin manila envelope that had been sitting in front of her since the hearing began. The room seemed to hold its breath as she slid out a single sheet of paper, its header stamped "Department of Defense Internal Memorandum" in bold black type. Under the fluorescent lights, the ink signature at the bottom was unmistakable: Donald J. Trump. This, she said, her voice steady but sharp, is a Pentagon memo dated 18 months ago. It authorizes the transfer of $42 million from the Veterans Assistance Fund to a luxury real estate project in Florida. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Cameras zoomed in on the document, the signature glowing on screen like a smoking gun. Jasmine's gaze locked on Trump. "Mr. President, you didn't just cut veterans' benefits. You redirected them to line the pockets of your friends." On the giant screen behind Jasmine, the committee staff queued up a slideshow. First, an aerial shot of a gleaming beachfront tower, its glass fade catching the Florida sun like a jewel. Next, a sprawling golf course, its emerald greens manicured to perfection, the kind where membership fees start at 6 figures. Then a private marina rows of luxury yachts bobbing gently in the water, each worth more than a lifetime of a veteran's pension. This, Jasmine's voice cut through the room, is where your benefits went. The contrast was brutal combat veterans sleeping in shelters while millions were poured into playgrounds for the elite. The silence in the hearing room now felt heavier, like even the walls understood the betrayal. A low rumble rose from the back rows, first murmurs, then angry voices. Veterans in faded uniforms shifted in their seats, their faces etched with disbelief. One man in a wheelchair shook his head slowly, his jaw clenched. Another gripped the brim of his service cap so tightly his knuckles turned white. From the press section, cameras clicked furiously, capturing every flicker of rage and betrayal. A decorated Marine with silver hair finally stood, his voice breaking as he said, "We fought for this country, and this is what we get." The tension crackled in the air. It wasn't just a hearing anymore, it was a reckoning. Trump leaned forward, his once relaxed posture now tense. His voice, usually smooth and controlled for the cameras, came out sharp and uneven. This is all fake political theater, you people." He stopped mid-sentence, searching for the next attack, but the words tangled together. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by quick, shallow breaths. He glanced at his aides, but none dared meet his eyes. For the first time in the hearing, Donald J. Trump looked less like the master of the room and more like a man cornered. Without raising her voice, Jasmine reached into the manila envelope and pulled out a small digital recorder. Click. The speakers in the hearing room crackled to life. Trump's unmistakable voice filled the air: "Cut the veterans' budget, make up for it with a parade." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some leaned forward in disbelief, others sat frozen, eyes darting toward Trump. The recording played again, each word landing like a hammer blow. "Cut the veterans' budget, make up for it with a parade." Jasmine didn't need to add a single word. Her silence was the loudest condemnation in the room. The moment the recording stopped, the room erupted. Murmurs swelled into sharp whispers, then into a rolling wave of outrage. Veterans in the audience exchanged looks of fury. A few shook their heads in disbelief. Cameras swiveled and zoomed in rapid bursts, one catching Trump's stiff jaw, another locking on Jasmine's unflinching stare. The red tally lights on the TV rigs burned steady, broadcasting every flicker of emotion to millions watching at home. Somewhere in the back, a voice rang out, "Shame!" It was quickly joined by another and another, until the word echoed off the marble walls. The tension was no longer just in the air. It was visible, alive, and spreading like wildfire. Trump's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he pushed back and rose to his feet. His face, once smug and self-assured, was now flushed and tight. Without looking at Jasmine or anyone, he straightened his jacket, muttered something under his breath, and turned toward the exit. The cameras followed him like predators tracking prey. Each step he took down the aisle felt heavier, slower, as if the air itself resisted his retreat. Reporters shouted questions, but he didn't answer. The only sound was the steady click, click, click of cameras capturing the image that would dominate headlines by morning. Donald Trump walking away from the fight. As the heavy doors closed behind Trump, Jasmine stepped away from the witness table. Without a word, she walked toward the front row, where veterans sat in quiet solidarity. One by one, they rose to their feet, not out of protocol, but out of respect. Jasmine positioned herself between them, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on the committee. A Marine in dress blues stood on her left, a retired Army medic on her right. Their uniforms, their medals, their scars visible and invisible formed a living wall of service. The cameras caught it, Jasmine Crockett, flanked by America's veterans standing as one. It was more than a photograph, it was a statement, and it would outlast the hearing, the headlines, and the politics. Across America, the moment lit up screens big and small. In a dimly lit bar in Dallas, every head turned toward the TV as the clip played on repeat. Jasmine, flanked by veterans, Trump walking out. A Vietnam vet at the end of the counter set down his beer and muttered, "Finally, someone said it." In a quiet living room in Ohio, a widow of a Marine clutched the edge of her blanket, her eyes welling with tears. On the coffee table, the remote lay forgotten as she whispered, "Thank you." On social media, hashtags erupted within minutes. Stand with vets, hashtag Crockett, truth, hashtag Trump walks out. The video spread faster than any campaign ad carried not by politicians, but by ordinary people who felt the sting of Trump's words and the power of Jasmine's stand. It wasn't just a headline anymore. It was a national reckoning. A local news crew caught up with Sergeant Daniel Reeves outside the Capitol steps. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with conviction. "I didn't lose a leg in Iraq so politicians could play games with our lives." Jasmine Crockett stood up for every one of us today. That's what real leadership looks like. In Phoenix, a young woman wearing her father's folded flag pin spoke through tears. "My dad didn't live to see this day, but he'd be proud. She gave us back our dignity." An elderly Navy veteran hunched over his cane, simply nodded when asked about Jasmine. She didn't just talk, she fought. The interviews weren't polished political sound bites. They were raw, human, and real. And that's why they spread like wildfire. The room was still. Even the whir of the cameras seemed to fade as Jasmine stepped forward, her voice steady, but weighted with the gravity of the moment. She scanned the faces before her veterans' families, reporters, lawmakers, and let the silence draw tight. Then she spoke. "Service is sacrifice, not self-interest." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. Some in the crowd nodded, others wiped away tears. In that instant, it wasn't just a statement, it was a challenge to every leader in the nation. As the gavel struck, sealing the end of the hearing, the phrase was already making its way to headlines, hashtags, and history books. Jasmine turned toward the cameras, her gaze steady, unblinking. "If you believe in this country, if you believe that sacrifice should be honored, not stolen, then stand with us, speak out. Don't let the voices of those who serve be silenced. Don't let their sacrifice be betrayed." She let the words hang for a moment, allowing them to sink deep into the hearts of every viewer watching at home in bars and living rooms across America. Because the fight for our veterans, she added, is the fight for the soul of this nation. This story reminds us that real service is not measured by words, titles, or appearances, but by sacrifice, integrity, and the courage to stand for what's right even when it's uncomfortable. Our veterans have given pieces of their lives for the freedoms we enjoy. The least we can do is protect their honor and ensure that their sacrifices are never treated as political currency. In life, standing by the truth might make you a target, but it will also make you a guardian of justice. If you believe in truth, justice, and honoring those who have served, hit that subscribe button now. Join our community and never miss a story that the mainstream media won't dare to tell. Because together we can keep the truth alive.